All right, so the Korea market follows the same structure. I'll whip through it a little bit faster, but I'll just talk about the market, the competition, etc., the opportunities that we have in that market, and then what strategy we have in Korea. So Korea is a really interesting place as a nation of beef consumers. So obviously we call Rocky is the beef capital. Well, in some ways Korea could be considered beef capital itself of Asia, because when you look at how much beef they eat over there, it's far more than any other Asian country. So we talked about Japan just now. Well, the Koreans eat 40% more beef per person than the Japanese. So when you go into Korea, you'll see beef everywhere. There's a whole bunch of dishes that are important to the Korean culture. Barbecue is one of them, but a whole bunch of other soups and various other dishes that include Australian beef or other beef. And it's also a large market. It's our third biggest market. It takes 15% of our beef volume, but it takes 20% of our grain-fed beef exports and 20% of our offal exports. So it is one of those markets which is important across a wide range of different cuts, not just a single cut or a short range of cuts. And the fierce competition angle is also present in Korea. So you can actually see we've been hit harder in Korea than in Japan by US competition, a rapid increase in American imports. But once again, it's not like it's taken all of our market share. In fact, it's just added extra beef into the market. The main thing which you may have read is Costco. So Costco, we're our largest grain-fed beef customer, chilled grain-fed beef customer in Korea, and they switched all their supply to the US beef last year. So that's led to a big increase. There's another thing which is a bit different in Korea, which is from Japan, which is that US beef actually has a tariff advantage of over 5%, whereas it's the opposite in Korea for us. So Korea is the sort of market where the US beef has a competitive advantage on price. And once again, just like Japan, it's important that I talk about competition, because you will go into a shop in Korea and you'll see Aussie beef and US beef sitting right next to each other, and consumers being forced to make a choice often between those two products. So just on American beef, it's a clear threat with increasing market share, supported by a variety of nationwide promotions. So in both markets that holds true, is that it's the US beef's main markets, these two markets, and it's also our main markets for chilled beef. And so there is that competitive threat in the place. But let's forget about competition now for the rest of the bit. Let's remove the US export situation from this chart. And when you look at this chart, that's an amazing success story, actually. So the Korean market, since the turn of the century, has doubled and doubled again, and 4 of the last 5 years were actually record years. So driven by economic growth and eating habits of the younger audience, Korea has just grown and grown as an importer of beef. So just to sum up, it's another big market, but it's one where competition's felt strongly. In fact, it's more strongly felt in Korea. So what strategy we have in place? Well, you'll recognise some of the next couple of charts, because they're the same, but from a Korean perspective. And the main point is Korea actually, even more than Japan, buys, or is nervous, I guess you could say, about provenance and country of origin. So I think it was 70% of the Japanese identified that as the key reason for how they choose beef. But in Korea, it's 83%. So it's even more a strong factor for when people are buying beef. And the other good news is that, country of origin is a stronger driver, and Australian beef is also stronger even in consumers' hearts and minds than it is in Japan. So same for statements, but Australian beef has an even stronger strength and with consumers' perception. So we're in a fantastic place. It's just for economic reasons mostly. US beef has been able to take some market share. We've conducted some research about how we position Australian beef in Korea, and because of that overwhelming desire to or concern about country of origin with imported beef in Korea, remembering that they never had BSE in their local herd, so they're even more sort of concerned, I suppose, about imported diseases, they would call it. The 3 things that came out of that survey that we can really strongly associate with as Australian beef: ideal environment, healthy and natural, and enjoyable friendly. And you remember from Jacob's presentation, they pretty match up almost exactly with the overall True Aussie brand, global brand. So we're really focusing our communications on those three attributes, because even the local beef and the American beef and other nations can't really own those attributes in a way that we do in people's hearts and minds. So Aussie beef is a clear favourite in a nation where we do have strong competition. Aussie beef is a really clear favourite, and with that confidence we can go and talk to our partners about Australian beef. And so, I'll move on to that in a second actually, because what we do in the market is not dissimilar to what we do in Japan. We work with the key partners to grow sales together. So we want to work in partnership with these large accounts and figure out their brand strategy and their promotion strategy for Australian beef, and we'll work with them and with their suppliers. If they're using a single supply chain, we'll obviously work in partnership with that supply chain. If they're buying Australian beef just out of the market, then we'll still try and make sure that that information gets fed all the way down the line. And with consistent promotion and strong trade relationships, as you saw in Japan, and strong consumer campaigns based on consumer insights. So one case study, I mentioned Costco before. I'll just tell a very quick anecdote about that issue. So Costco were our #1 buyer of chilled grain-fed beef in Korea, and they made a decision last year to switch their supply to Australian beef, from Australian beef to US beef. And it wasn't that big a surprise to us, because they're an American company, and any market that they operate where they can get US products for food, in food products, they'll get them. That's their supply chain. They're an American company, big company, with a cheap, efficient supply chain from the US. So they made a decision for commercial reasons and maybe head office reasons where they're based, that they will switch over. But we obviously short-term concern, because that's a big hole in the market. But because we have that great insights about where the brand is in people's, in terms of its consumer perceptions, we were able to go into Costco's competitors and propose that we lift up the promotional activity that we have around Australian beef. And those competitors were really happy to do that, because obviously they're trying to drive market share gains against their competitor. So there's a few photos up here of what we ended up doing. That's the Australian ambassador to Korea, Mr. James Choi, there with a family, and the president of one of the big retailers in Korea. We put together a large promotion last year with 3 or 4 of those competitors, and in fact we were able to recover the sales of chilled grain-fed beef, 80% of it anyway, into Korea within 6 months. So, because of the strength of our brand, we know that we're confident that we can walk into accounts and start talking about how we work on pulling that product through. But just one other point is that we've also obviously conduct more advertising and promotion to consumers. We don't just work with those partners, because we want consumers to continue demanding our product when they're at the point of sale. So this year we've come up with a new campaign. It's built around the concept of good nature. So you'll see that that's pulling in the aspects of the brand that I discussed and what attributes Australian beef has in the market. So we've got they love in North Asia the quirky characters. So you saw the koala in that video in Japan. Here we've got a cow, really popular with families, but it's not just for kids. Many brands actually use mascots and characters in these markets to build likability, I suppose. So you see some of the materials that we're using from now on in Korea. You'll see, different from Japan, it's much more focused on nature and natural beef, and that's because that's the opportunity that we have in Korea at the moment. So we've built, once again, a program to deliver against consumer and trade insights. So just to summarise, really for both presentations, I suppose, both markets, US competition is being felt very strongly in these markets, and you would have no doubt read, in QCL, etc., Beef Central, about that US competition in Japan and Korea. But we don't have, long-term, we're not overly concerned about that, because we know that we have this a clear favouritism in both Korea and Japan around Australian beef. So we're in a fantastic position in the long term. And from MLA's point of view, we're trying to build a program to deliver against insights such as that. So I think the main thing I want to leave with you for this presentation is that long-term success for Australian beef in these 2 key markets really depends on winning the hearts and minds of consumers. We've got a whole industry that's geared towards that. From MLA perspective, we've got 14 people working in these markets, and they're passionately delivering against that. Thanks very much.